Humans. What's that? The famous German physicist Max Planck has a quote, "Science advances one funeral at a time." Science advances one funeral at a time. The gist of it is that the old guard has their old guard theories, and they are replaced by the emergence of the new guard, of the next generation who discard all of those old beliefs with new technologies, new evidence, new data, new insights, more maturity within the field. Things change, but you have to have the old folks die off in order for the new ones to take root and for progress to really occur in science. Well, the same thing happens in culture, and more specifically, the same thing happens with race relations. It takes time. I wish we could snap our fingers. I wish we didn't have to struggle like we do. I probably shouldn't say that because I do believe that the struggle is necessary. The struggle is necessary. It is going to, as we continue to make progress, we are going to look back over our shoulder and see all we overcame and all the effort and energy we put into making progress, and we do not want to go backwards. So the struggle kind of makes you, just like when you struggle as a person who doesn't have money, right? When you struggle and you finally succeed, man, you appreciate it a lot more than had someone just handed it to you without you earning it, right? So we are earning the victory in race relations. It's just going to take a lot of time, and part of why it happens and takes so much time is just there's a generational effect. I'm 62 years old. I'll be 62 in September. And I can remember, let me just give you a quick part of my experience in my 6 decades of living in America. I grew up in Columbus, Georgia, which is largely a military town. At one time, the world's largest military base was Fort Benning. My father was stationed there. I grew up in a mixed neighborhood. It was 50-50 white and black. And I went to schools right at the beginning of integration. Integration was beginning about the time I moved to Columbus. What was that, roughly 72? We moved there in 68. I think roughly 72. I'm bad at dates and that kind of stuff. So I've seen where we have come to from that starting point. My parents were from Mississippi, and so every summer I would visit Mississippi. And Mississippi was very different from the environment that I was growing up in Columbus. It was much more agricultural. It was a different country. The country folks in Mississippi are different than city folks in Georgia. And my cousins, I was aware of that. My cousins kind of had that. There was that city mouse, country mouse kind of thing, and I was kind of an object of curiosity, right? And Columbus is no big city, but it was a lot bigger than the little city in Mississippi, where my relatives were from. I love my relatives deeply, but all of us are imperfect. And part of the imperfection of that era, it's less so now, but it's still within this generation very much alive. Part of that generation's culture, free use of the N-word. The N-word would fly with regularity. It was shocking to me as a young boy who was growing up with black kids, and I didn't use the word. That was not what we did in the city, for good reason. If you wanted, it was a survival instinct, right? You know the things to say. But that was not the case in Mississippi. That was flying freely. And the amount of prejudice that they still carried was very, very much alive. I saw it. I saw it. Now, as a little boy, I was in no position to correct my much older uncles and aunts and grandparents. I was just there. It didn't. It was. It didn't stick to me though. It was nothing that resonated with me because it was so different than my experience of my friends. I had all my black friends, right? I'm growing up in a black neighborhood. I'm playing football with all these black kids. We're playing basketball. We're hanging out at each other's houses. That my relatives in Mississippi, that was not a part of their existence. They had none of that experience. They had a very siloed kind of experience. The whites were here and the blacks were over here. Not in my hometown. We were all in it together. Good and bad. Banging around with each other. Yeah. So that reality that I saw there was very distinct from the reality that I knew. And I trusted my reality more than theirs. I heard it, and it was like being on a National Geographic explorer expedition, sometimes going to Mississippi and kind of just visiting and dropping in on a culture. And wow, at the time, there were white and black water fountains, and white and black, or depending on how, I forget how they were worded. I think it was white and black, or maybe it was colored, was the sign at that time. And there were white and colored bathrooms as well. And I distinctly remember going down to the hardware store in this little city and climbing the stairs I think I was probably 7 years old, climbing the stairs to go to the bathroom. I told my uncle who had brought me there that I was going upstairs to the bathroom. He said, okay. So when I hadn't come back after about 10 minutes, he began to get a little concerned. And so he walked upstairs and he's looking around. He looks in the white bathroom. Rick? No Rick. Cracks the door on the colored bathroom. Rick? Yeah. I don't know why. Colored seemed more fun to me, I guess. I prefer more color than whiteness. So I don't know what I was thinking at the time. I wasn't being a rebel. I wasn't trying to be a crusader for justice. I just ended up in the colored bathroom. Similarly, and I was told that, and he was gentle about it. He was not insulting, and he was just like, that's not where you should be. Now, he knew I was adopted. It was clear that I wasn't the whitey white that the rest of my family was. I was this half German, half Honduran mixed kid, but they loved me like they loved everybody else. There was never an issue. They just loved me. And he gently took me out and said, that's not where you belong. You belong over here in this one. Similarly, when I would want to drink out of the colored water fountain, I got a similar kind of correction. No, you're supposed to be over here. So I remember those days very clearly. And I, based on my experiences in Mississippi, I saw racism at its rawest root, just in terms of how white people talked privately and the kinds of language they used, the kinds of thoughts that they shared among one another. Yeah, I saw it. Now, many of my aunts and uncles, certainly my grandparents, have passed. And my grandparents, that generation before my aunts and uncles, they were more virulent in their racism because it was an older time. It was even closer to slavery, and a lot of the vestiges of that and a lot of those dynamics were still very much alive. Within their lifetime, they had actually seen slaves. Then they had their children who never saw slaves, but heard the stories about about black people and why and how and all this kind of stuff. But it wasn't their immediate experience, right? So the old guard had died. Less of the virus, less of the racism virus was passed along to the next generation of my aunts and uncles and my parents. Let's go into now my generation, okay? That generation is starting to die. How much of the virus was passed on to my generation? Some. I still have some of that in me. As much as I love Black people, as aware as I am and as sensitive as I am to the Black struggle, the Black cause, the Black aspirations, and to whatever extent I have any role in it, even on the sidelines and cheering folks on, I know I have some of the virus. It just is. It's communicable. It was as communicable as COVID. Okay, I didn't ask for it, but I was in an environment where it existed and it attached itself to me. I remember a very specific moment in my life that I was 13 years old, and I had been playing with my friend Jeff, Big Jeff. We had Big Jeff and Little Jeff in the neighborhood. Big Jeff was a football player about my age, good football player, linebacker. And we played ball together on teams, and we played in the neighborhood. And I'd often go over to his house and hang out and play, and had a sleepover over at his house. This was back in the day. Let me tell you, there weren't a lot of white kids having sleepovers at Black kids' homes in the mid 70s. At least in my awareness. There may have been, y'all correct me if I'm wrong, but we were still kind of struggling to figure out if that was cool or not, if that was allowable or not. But his parents were cool, and I stayed over, and and he had a cute sister too, so I didn't mind that. But I wanted to return the favor. I wanted Jeff to come over to my house, and I wanted him to come over for dinner because he was my friend, and I had eaten at his house. And I asked my parents, can I bring Jeff over? Big Jeff over. Now they knew that he was Black. Boy, that was a hard moment for them. I don't know. Is that the right thing to do? I mean, the struggle was real with my parents, okay? Now, my parents my father was in the Army, so he worked in side by side, shoulder to shoulder with Black men every single day. So he lived in a different kind of world than, he did in Mississippi, in a way that sports and military bring people together and kind of smooth out a lot of the differences because you're all on the same team, right? So it's a different dynamic. But that was really uncomfortable. That was a really uncomfortable moment for them, and I originally got a no. I don't think that's a good idea. But I persisted because I'm that way. And after a couple of more days of, bringing the topic up, they relented, and they said, all right. For them, their fear, their concern, they'd never done that before. They may not have had a private meal with a Black person before like that in their own home, ever. Certainly wasn't in Mississippi. So part of it was just the strangeness of it for them. It was nothing they had ever had in their experience. And the other part of it, I believe, was fear of what other people would think. Would the other white people in the neighborhood seeing a Black kid coming into our house, like everybody's looking out the windows, constantly surveilling who's coming and going, but that's the fear, right? That's part of the irrationality of our humanity and our racial thoughts. And what are people going to think if they see us, having Black people over here? I'm guessing that was part of their fear. But Big Jeff showed up. We had a nice dinner, and he was a little bit uncomfortable because they were a little bit uncomfortable at first. And then we all relaxed because the world didn't explode. The house didn't set on fire. Everything was like, just another human, just has different color skin. He's well-mannered. Knew how to use his knife and fork. Didn't burp or fart at the table. He was just kind of well-mannered Black kid showing up, having a meal with his friend Rick. That's what it was. But it was a struggle. A struggle that would never, ever, 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 ever happen in my home. But how much did I pass on to my children? It's always a question. How much does our children's generation have of it? They still have some. But I think it's far less. And here's why I think. When I was a young boy, or just a young man, but if you were to ask me what I did that afternoon, I might say I went and played basketball with my black friends, or I went and hung out with, or someone would say, what are you going to go do tonight? I'm going to grab some drinks with my black friend Harold. What an unnecessary qualifier. But I always remember sometimes it was a frequent thing to say, add black to as a descriptor. It was just kind of a natural thing. I wasn't thinking through it. It just was what had percolated up. Okay. But when my son was about 7 years old, we have our city, probably the schools are, our city is about 80% black and 80% white and about 15% black. It roughly mirrors the demographics of the nation, okay? A little bit more white, few more Asians than on average nationally. But when he was about 7 years old, I started hearing about his friend Griffin. And he and Griffin really were good friends. They talked on the phone and texted and played, and he would always come back and tell me stories about Griff. And this went on for several months after he had struck up this friendship, and I'd ask him what him and Griff were up to, and he was going over to Griff's house, and they were going to go play and do this and that. All right, Griff, that's who he was playing with. And then one day he said, I want to see if it's okay to have Griff over for a sleepover. And I'm like, cool, man. I love having kids over for sleepovers. Our home was our doors were regularly open to kids having sleepovers at our place. And my kids regularly spent the night at other friends' homes. So that day when Griff was, or that afternoon when Griff was to arrive for this sleepover, I'm, sitting in my chair doing some work on my laptop, and I hear the door knock, and I go to answer the door, and there's a short black kid, and I open the door and say, "Hey, what's up?" He goes, "Oh, I'm here for. Is Noah here?" Yeah. He says, "I'm Griffin," and then Noah shows up, and they dab each other up and head back to Noah's room and start playing video games or whatever they were doing. Yeah. And it was shocking to me. I was a little embarrassed that I had, it was a whole mix of emotions. I was surprised that Griff was a black kid. I had no idea that he was a black kid because my son had never even mentioned that aspect of him. It wasn't part of how he defined Griff. Now, he knew he had black skin, but when he was talking to the family and talking about the things they did, it was an unnecessary detail to include. Just wasn't part of his regular consciousness about how to identify his friend as a black friend. It was just Griff. It's different. It's better. It's better. It's progress. My daughter has had and he would spend the night at Griff's house. And Griff's parents and I would talk on the phone and text back and forth. And it wasn't a black and white conversation. It was just a conversation between two sets of parents who loved their kids and were interested in their well-being and their safety and knowing where they were and what they were going to be doing. And if it was okay, if you were cool with him staying over at your house or, him staying over at mine, we're just kind of checking in. What time are you going to pick them up? What time? Where are they going? Does he need to bring anything? All those kind of just pragmatic details that parents negotiate. like parents, not black parents and white parents, just parents, human parents. Similar thing with my daughter. My daughter is like me. She has an affinity for black culture. She goes to parties with black kids all the time, has sleepovers with black kids, has kids over at our house with, we have sleepovers at our house. That has been the experience of my children's life in their generation at our home. It has become, color was an unnecessary detail when discussing their friends. And as they have gotten older, we have begun to have more conversations about race and culture and the dynamics and, our hopes and our fears and all of those things. But that childhood that they have and their racial awareness is so, so different than mine. And when my generation dies off, the level of racial virulence that we had in our generation will die off as well. And it will be in the hands of our children, this next generation. That makes me feel good in spite of a lot of the shit that I see on YouTube that really concerns me about the level of animus that isn't being intentionally stirred up by some folks just to get clicks and make money. Some may accuse me of that. I'm aware. It may be fair criticism. I'm just trying to say what I think is important to say. All right. If I make money saying it, that's a secondary thing. The first order, the first priority is to speak the truth as I understand it in my life. And to give black people a little peek through the curtain of a white person's mind. I hear a lot of black YouTube commentators talking about those folks, what those folks think and those folks want and those folks believe and those folks, them folks, how they are and what they want to do to us and all that. All right. You can believe that if you want to. They're talking, but this is straight from the horse's mouth. This is straight from the beige horse's mouth. I'm whitish. I'm not whitey white. I'm white-ish. Okay. So for whatever it's worth, to be able to peek inside the brain of an actual white person and actually hear what they actually think versus what you think they think. Big difference. Okay. So I'm just trying to be a truthful reporter here. So that experience of my kids, and, feeling so comfortable and thinking about race or not thinking about race in the ways that I did, that's progress. Let's protect the progress that we've made. I think we need to be vigilant about it. And you see in my content, I'm pushing back against some people that I think are threatening the progress that we've made. I encourage you to do the same, that if you see people who are just misrepresenting reality and misrepresenting progress and making people afraid and stirring up people's emotions for no good practical reason other than just to get people riled up so they watch more of your content and click more, so that you addict them to that feeling of, I want them to feel, push back. And, on the other hand, reward the people who you think are helping the cause. All right? That's the thought. Racism dies one funeral at a time. Good luck to us all. Peace.